Who does understand English? Okay, yeah, if I ask who doesn't, then I don't see who answers. Thank you. I have one request. I seem to have misplaced my mobile phone. If somebody finds it or has already returned it, thank you for giving it back. It's nothing worth it. It's an old Palm Web OS. So if you find an old telephone, that's mine. Thank you. I just very quickly, the European Crowdfunding Network, we are an association. We are not legally implemented yet, so we're just a group of people, an interest group with about 850 people around Europe that have an interest. We have about 150 people in the industry somehow that in one or the other way have shown interest. And we are a close group of about 10 people that regularly talk, we do certain things, and we have engaged with the European regulators in Brussels on behalf of the crowdfunding industry. They haven't asked us to do that, so we just did it. But we are now at a point where we get their backing in what we do. And I will talk about that just in a second. I think crowdfunding is really exciting. Yeah? It opens up totally new ways of how we can push innovation forward, create new things, and also take a little bit of power from the established financial system. I want to explain regulation in Europe. This is roughly how it works. I don't understand it. I don't know if anyone understands it. There are 27 member states. I don't know how many regions are involved in Europe. Lobby groups, unions, large businesses, people like us. It is incredibly complex. And whatever comes out in the process in Brussels, that means the European Commission drafts something, it goes to the Parliament, they send it back, some other one has something to say, it is never perfect. And once it is published, and then as a directive may be implemented in Italy or in Germany, nobody's happy with that. And in 5 or 7 years, it will have been rewritten. And so it's a continuously process. And if you want to have something to say in any legislative process, you always have to engage. And we started doing that in Brussels because even though nobody really knows it, most of our legislation comes from Brussels. Yeah, even in Italy, even in Germany. Our politicians don't tell us that. They say the good things come from us and the bad things come from Brussels. So I will go on maybe with the next slide. Very quickly, I didn't understand what has been said today, so I go up here because it's far too small for you to see, but anyone who ever has started a business, or a small one, I mean, it doesn't matter, you need money, yeah, and if you don't have money, you need someone to lend you money. But nobody lends you money if you don't have money. I mean, no bank gives you money. You say, I have a great idea. Yeah, doesn't work. So equity capital is really important. It's not the only thing. You can also work around that, yeah? Rewards-based crowdfunding is a fantastic model to pre-finance some things. And once you've done that, you can go out and ask for equity. So I love the vision of all the different possibilities with crowdfunding, building into a whole ecosystem that leads to growth or to a certain level where you're happy. Normally, friends, family, fools, fans provide the first money. But how many friends do you have that will help you fund your business if you need 1 million euros? So many people don't get very far. Business angels also do that. But again, there's very few, and they all have a specific interest. And if you, with your idea, don't fit into that interest, you don't get money. This is where crowdfunding has a real potential. Because all these people, they invest money, but they have an intrinsic motivation to see this project happen. It is not a financial motivation. It is not a motivation where people say, I get 20% return. It is a motivation where they say, I want to see this happen. I want to be one of the people. Yeah? So it's an emotional attachment. When we talk about venture capital, private equity, IPO, investment banks, it's all numbers. It's an Excel spreadsheet. They don't care too much about social impact. Is it good or is it bad? So I think this is important to understand. And I think what is also important to understand is that entrepreneurship has nothing to do with web startups. Entrepreneurship has to do with wanting to do something and take a risk. And it can be in music, it can be in design, and you still can be an entrepreneur and you can build a hugely successful business or just a good business. So I think entrepreneurship we have to think about really widely. Yeah. We go to the next slide very quickly because it is really boring. European regulation that impacts equity crowdfunding. But if I say that most of this also impacts some other form of crowdfunding, yeah, you can already see it. The Prospectus Directive regulates how you market equity investments. And there's a harmonization in Europe that is great for every investment or every fundraising effort above 5 million euros. If you raise funds below 5 million euros, it is not harmonized, which means you have 27 different interpretations. And if you want to raise pan-European, it becomes really, really complicated. Below 100,000, there is also harmonization, because the Commission said that doesn't really interest us, but there is still possibilities for interpretation, and so not everyone is always aligned on that. Accepting reclaimable funds, yeah. If you operate in an investment fund or a platform and you take money, but you offer the money in return if, say, the project doesn't work out, there's regulation for that. It is not always in favor of crowdfunding. It doesn't always apply because you have to apply to certain rules. That is expensive. But if you don't do it, you again fall under national regulation. And then the result is that if you're an Italian platform, you will not be able to expand into Austria because they write in German, they have Austrian law, everything is different. And even if you do that, you can't expand into the next country because the costs are just too high. So it is regulated, but it is regulated with larger organizations in mind that have a lot of power that can do this. Collective investments in transferable securities, UCITS, AFM. This is about the question, if you manage money of other people, you usually also manage your money. You have to keep them apart. You have to be able to show whose money is invested where. To comply with these is very expensive, so most crowdfunding platforms in equity will not comply, which means, again, they will be regulated on national level and they will not be able to expand across Europe. So we will never be able to have scale. We talked about Kickstarter earlier today, where you can raise 10 million euros, but that is a market of 250 million people. But since we cannot be pan-European, we can only be Italian or Dutch or German, we cannot get to that level. So it's another thing. The other ones are MiFID. We don't talk about this. Corporate law. You cannot set up a business that has a public shareholder structure where you can have many, many shareholders at a reasonable cost because you have to go to the notary. And if you crowdfund a project with 2,000 people, then imagine the notary fees to just set up this business. So there's ways around it, and in some legislations in Europe, you can actually use different legal structures, but overall it is not something we can apply. So that is enough. We can go to the next slide. I just quickly show that a few people, I and a few more people have written a framework. And we published that on Monday. All these drafts we have shared with the European Commission. The European Commission has invited us to present that in more detail. We have a few copies here and somewhere in the back. Dan Marom, one of the authors, has it. He signed them as well, if you want. What we said is we address all the legal issues. We make recommendations. We talk about what is crowdfunding in general, how big is the market. Yeah, so it's very concise, but it's not perfect. We say we need a framework where we need the public bodies, regulators, politicians, other stakeholders, but also industry, so platforms, lawyers, advisors, to work on regulation. That is for the people of Consop, this is why they're here. What is crowdfunding? How does it work? How can we use it to the benefit of our economy? And then they should review the legislation, as we just seen for European. They should invite the industry and people associated to the industry to share knowledge, expert discussion groups, yeah, in order to formulate their business. And they should make crowdfunding or entrepreneurship a political cause. Because if you don't believe it, then you're actually not acting for it. And the industry, we say, has to create a code of conduct and best practices and reporting guidelines and consumer protection and, you know, a kind of accreditation. What is a crowdfunding? And, you know, they know it, but it's not communicated. There's no standard. I mean, if you are interested in crowdfunding, where do you find, you know, all the things that were discussed here today? There is not one place. That is the job of the industry. Education. Regulators have to understand that crowdfunding can be a sustainable financing and promotion tool. And it is a funding tool. You can use it to fund. And you can create incentives that crowdfunding is being used more. But they have to understand that, and they have to communicate that to their stakeholders, to people involved, to the people on the street. So that my mother, who doesn't know how to pronounce crowdfunding, would maybe one day say, oh, that's a great thing, I want to do this. Because she has a right to do that. So this is a role of the public bodies. And the industry has to train their customers. They have to promote the success, and they have to showcase benefits and risks, It's good to say, oh, crowdfunding is great, but there's always risks attached. And there will be people that criticize the industry at some point. So now is the time to really focus on that. And then research, it's basically data. What is the social impact? What do we do? How many projects survive within X number of years? What is the outcome? You can ask that to the venture capital industry. I worked with the venture capital industry. They have no clue. They have data that is wrong. They know it is wrong. That's the only data they have. They will repeat it until you believe it. Crowdfunding is a slightly different position here. It's very open. It's very collaborative. It is very important that the industry can provide data. So governments have to fund this and ask for it. The industry has to open up their data, think about transparency, benchmarking, and publish that. And I think then we will have a professional and globally competitive industry with the best interest of the European economies. We will have public awareness and understanding. It shouldn't be something obscure. It should be something like, I'm going to the bank. Oh, I'm just going to crowdfund. It should become normality. And it should be public and transparent. You should open up the Italian Financial Times and they should say, latest crowdfunding statistics. Then we have an ecosystem that allows for crowdfunding to really prosper. And so I've taken the liberty, it's not my country, but Rome wasn't built in one day, but we had cheap wine yesterday. And so we had a few ideas and we got a few people. If you go to the next slide. Why don't you help the people of Consort who have a really hard job to understand what the Monti government wants with this Innovation Act and figure how that fits into European legislation? With coming together and joining forces, that's all the industry players here that were speaking today, that is also people that here in the audience that have crowdfunded, want to crowdfund, or are associated to it, and form some form of interest group that can collaborate and have one voice and answer questions with clarity, with one voice, and not with 50 different opinions in 50 different slideshows to people like Consort, to people like the European Commission, to anyone who wants to listen. So I've set out over there a list where you can write your name and your email address, and Daniela from Twin Tangibles, who coordinates that, would push this forward, and Ivana would also help to set this up. And you could today walk out of here and say, wow, we were a crowd, we created something, and we will do something good. So I ask you to come here and put your name there and your email address and engage into the Italian policy process, which is ongoing, and have a say in the future of your economy. Thank you.